Hello everyone, and welcome to the 68th episode of Analyzing Evil, featuring the characters of Unforgiven. A story centered around the struggle between the lawless morality of Wild West outlaws and the flawed justice of a corrupt sheriff. Unforgiven is a story that serves to challenge the preconceived notion some of us may have about the characters we find in traditional westerns. Within this story, we find two former outlaws who share a horrifying past of criminality. Outlaws who have strayed from the path they once walked to become simple farmers, a path they find themselves treading once more when given the promise of earning a quick buck whilst avenging the mutilation of a defenseless woman. On the other end of this tale is a man of the law, a sheriff who uses the powers afforded him to suit his own needs. A man secure in his position, looking to ensure that it stays one of comfort at the expense of those in his care. A man who abuses the power afforded him by the citizens of his town. Now, typically I try to focus on one evildoer at a time, but this film presents us with a few central characters who all hold a certain degree of evil within them, and considering their stories overlap to present us with a broader view of the complexities of the American West and the evil that can be found there, I figured it would be best to cover them all at once. So in this video, we're going to be examining portions of almost every character in this film, including the women of Skinny's brothel, the men who violated Delilah, Quick Mike, his companion Davy, as well as William Money, Ned Logan, the Schofield Kid, English Bob, W.W. Beauchamp, and of course, Sheriff William Little Bill Daggett, examining components of each of their characters to discern the overall message this film presents us with through their actions, motivations, and histories. But before we begin, let's first talk about our sponsor for this video, Squarespace. Squarespace is the premier service in the industry when it comes to creating your own website. The creation process is incredibly simple and interactive, and it won't take you much time to get comfortable with all that Squarespace has to offer. They have great features like members areas, which is a section of your website that you can use to provide exclusive content to your target audience. You can display any projects or videos in any section of your site with the portfolio and galleries feature and video blocks feature, respectively, giving you the ability to further customize your site with content that you've produced yourself. Square also makes buying a domain an easy process, and getting the handle that you'd like is as simple as pressing a few buttons. I've already started setting up my own site, and there will be a lot of great things to find there once it's ready to go, and I couldn't have done it any better without the help of Squarespace, because Squarespace really is the best solution for building a website. And if you're interested in getting started on your own creation, head to squarespace.com now to begin setting up your site. And when you're ready to launch, make sure you go to squarespace.com/thevileeye to save 10% off your first purchase of a domain. Thank you, Squarespace, for sponsoring this video. Unforgiven presents us with one overarching plot point that serves as the focal point of this story, that being the mutilation of a prostitute, Delilah, after she laughs at a touchy cowboy, Quick Mike, who's not so well equipped in the genitalia department. However, what really sets things in motion is the way in which Little Bill handles this situation. Rather than punishing the man who carved up this woman's face, he, along with Skinny, treats Delilah in one of the worst ways a human can treat another, as property. With no regard for the trauma this poor woman just experienced, Little Bill sentences this man and his companion to provide 7 ponies to Skinny come spring, recompense for the damage done to Skinny's property, a judgment made hastily without due process, in order to end this quickly and without further incident, showing us all at once how callous Bill is, and how little regard he holds for these women altogether. Seeing this for the injustice that it is, the women of Skinny's establishment decide to take matters into their own hands, placing a bounty of $1,000 on the man who cut up Delilah, as well as his partner, who, while initially grabbing Delilah so Quick Mike could better assault her, released her and attempted to stop his friend from harming her any further. Now, there's something very important that we need to establish here, and that's whether anyone in this situation is approaching it in the right way, and the answer to that is no. Little Bill and Skinny offer punishment for these men that falls far too short of justice, as treating a person like property and glossing over the crimes committed to their person in favor of the person who owns them is beyond horrible. Granted, Skinny does have a legally binding contract with her, and if she's unable to deliver on the promise she made to him in that contract, he's well within his right to receive the compensation she agreed to provide him. But there's a number of different ways that particular problem could have been resolved, while also punishing the man who harmed Delilah. Now, Little Bill and Skinny are certainly in the wrong here, but the girls are in the wrong here as well. The boy who cut up Delilah has obviously committed a crime that deserves to be punished severely, and there's no excuse for what he did. However, Delilah is alive. She's scarred, physically and emotionally, for life. but she is alive. Justice in eras past was often hard to enforce equally across the vast expanse of a country, and even today, we often fall short of providing true justice to those who deserve it. But there's a tried and true sentiment that has often seen us through difficult judicial moments when the law falls short of its target. The punishment should fit the crime, or an eye for an eye, if you prefer it said in that way. And the girls putting a bounty on these men here is more like an eye for an entire body, which is hardly fair. Don't get me wrong, I have no sympathy for a man who would maim a woman for laughing at him, but offering up death as just compensation for injury is hardly the right way to approach this kind of situation. If anything, Little Bill was on the right track when he suggested whipping them for their crimes, but even then, that doesn't quite equal the torment this woman will have to live through for the rest of her days, with visible scars plastered all across her face. But again, death is not a suitable punishment for injury, let alone serving death to a man who initially aided in this crime, but quickly attempted to stop it once he realized the gravity of the situation. And though these men would have likely never received any further punishment for their crimes, had Alice and the other girls not placed the bounty on them, it still remains an action that comes with several repercussions, which we'll be covering here shortly. If anything, they could have placed a bounty on his head that requested him to be captured and brought to the women of Skinny's establishment so they could do to him as he'd done to Delilah. But in essence, what I'm trying to convey to you here is the fact that everything about this whole scenario is wrong, and because it's wrong, it inevitably leads to more wrong, that being the attraction of outlaws and bounty hunters, men of ill repute who can hardly be considered the bringers of good tidings, men who will in one way or another cause more problems for the people involved in this story. And the first such outlaw to come calling is an old enemy of Little Bill, English Bob, and along with him comes his literary companion, Mr. Beauchamp. The arrival of English Bob gives us our first insight into the cruelty of Little Bill. Rather than simply confiscating their guns, we see that Bill prefers to teach English Bob. Bill has enacted an ordinance that requires all newcomers to the town of Big Whiskey to surrender their guns to the authorities. But rather than simply confiscating their guns here, we see that Bill prefers to teach English Bob a lesson by beating him within an inch of his life, all while he has a host of guns trained on him, a lesson that I'm sure he assumed would send a message to any other would-be bounty hunters, a lesson that has a good amount of satisfaction built in it for Little Bill, considering how much he detests English Bob, as he confesses to Mr. Beauchamp later on in the film. Now, English Bob represents a tried and true stereotype with an English twist, the classic villainous, murderous outlaw with a license to kill that we all love to detest when they start mouthing off. And in this case, mouthing off about the inferiority of America in the face of the grandeur of England. But his companion represents something altogether more romantic, ignorant, and even sinister, the perpetuation of the mythos that surrounds the American Wild West. In the scene where we find Little Bill harassing English Bob and Mr. Beauchamp in their jail cell, we see Little Bill tearing apart their supposedly biographical account of English Bob's escapades across the American West. As Little Bill is mocking his writing, Mr. Beauchamp asserts that everything he penned in this book is fact taken from eyewitness accounts of the events that transpire within. But Little Bill was an actual eyewitness to the exploits of the Duck of Death, and he proceeds to tell Mr. Beauchamp that English Bob was not a noble man protecting the honor of a defenseless maiden, but a jealous drunk killing an unarmed and injured man in cold blood after he had slept with a woman he had desired. Now, twisting facts in this way in order to tell a better story might seem harmless, as there are thousands of fictional stories that have been created over the course of our history that have no basis in fact, and they serve us well as entertainment. But the problem we have here is a fairy tale being passed off as reality, a tale that has not a single ounce of truth built into it, but is being presented as fact. But why is this such a bad thing? Because it perpetuates the idea that the life of an outlaw and a gunslinger is some romantic affair full of heroism, bravery, and chivalry, when in reality, it's a dirty business populated by scoundrels, thieves, and assassins who deserve no praise whatsoever. I'm sure there were legendary outlaws and noble gunslingers who lived legendary and noble lives, but they were the exception, not the rule. And when you present them as the rule, you can cause impressionable youths to view the Wild West as some romantic fantasy land full of adventure, a place where the killing is noble and the villains are heroes. And we're presented with one such impressionable youth, the Schofield Kid. Now, the Schofield Kid never had a chance to read The Duck of Death, but he was given the opportunity to hear about the exploits of his Uncle Pete and his band of outlaws, tales that contained a large amount of truth, but had the same effect as a Western fairy tale all the same. As though there was truth in his uncle's tales, I'm sure he left out the more gruesome aspects of them, like what it means exactly that William Money was a cold-blooded killer with no mercy, or the horrifying details of killing someone. How a person begs for their mother as they lay bleeding on the ground in front of you, or what a head really looks like when it has a few holes blown into it. It would seem that the Schofield kid was encouraged by his uncle to pursue life as a bounty hunter and an outlaw, considering he suggested William Money as a partner, but whether or not that's true, we don't know. However, what is true is that the Schofield kid isn't a killer as he initially claimed. Rather, he's a green boy who's fallen for the fabricated charm of the Wild West. A boy out to prove himself as a rootin'-tootin' fearless outlaw looking for adventure and treasure. A search that brings him to the brutal killer his uncle had spoke of, William Money, a man who shot a man through the mouth for no reason at all, a man who killed countless men of the law or otherwise to serve his own selfish aims, a man who bombed a place called Rock Island and killed an unknown number of women and children. A man who was disliked and feared even by his fellow outlaws. A man who by all accounts should be rotting in a jail cell for the many crimes he's committed, but who has instead found his way to a respectable life as a farmer. But unfortunately for William Money, his life as a farmer is not as prosperous as he would like it to be, as all he has to show for his efforts are ramshackle pens holding sick pigs and a small rundown cottage on the Great Plains of Kansas. With the arrival of a tough-talking, starry-eyed youth selling the promise of an easy payday, William is given the opportunity to repair his newfound fortune by returning to his old ways, albeit this time with less viciousness than before. And with him we find a former companion, Ned Logan, who, while purportedly not as terrifying as William, was an outlaw just the same, an outlaw who's hinted that he's killed his fair share of men and committed his fair share of crimes. So, these three men ride off to find a bit of fortune in the town of Big Whiskey, and upon their arrival, William is greeted with the same treatment given to English Bob, while Ned and the Schofield kid partake in a game of Greeley billiards. Here we find again the cruelty of Little Bill, as he beats a sick and defenseless man with the same guns aimed at him. Yet another message branded into the flesh of a fellow man, a message designed to show that the town of Big Whiskey is hostile to any would-be assassins. Now, something you can't blame Bill for is trying to keep order in his town. He is in charge of Big Whiskey, and his duty is to ensure that it stays a lawful place. However, what you can blame him for is using his own brand of justice to violate several laws in an attempt to rule the town the way he wants it to be ruled. The women of Greeley's establishment have placed an illegal bounty upon the heads of the two cowboys who cut up Delilah, and as sheriff of Big Whiskey, it's Bill's duty to deter any would-be assassins from his town. But the reason these men offered this bounty in the first place is because of the shoddy ruling that Little Bill gave in lieu of any traditional United States legal process, and by enforcing an ordinance banning firearms, he's also violating the rights given to every citizen of the United States by the Second Amendment of the Constitution, not to mention that he's choosing to punish any person who withholds their guns from him by physically assaulting them. Ned and the Schofield kid are determined to get their due, and after William has healed, we find the trio holed up in a sniper's nest, ambushing the cowboys. Only something quite unexpected happens to Ned here. Throughout this story, whenever William or Ned talk about their past, William points out that for the majority of his life as an outlaw, he was drunk more often than not, and by extension, so was Ned, which we can assume not because he said so directly, but because at one point, when the three of them are riding in the rain, Ned pulls out a bottle of whiskey and comments that they'll need it when it comes time to kill their target. And we find out the reason they'd need it is because, as we've already established, the idea of killing a man is easy, but actually doing it certainly isn't. However, it becomes much easier when one is inebriated, and unfortunately for Ned, he didn't realize this until the moment when he was called upon to pull the trigger. Here, Ned comes to the realization that what he's about to do is end a man's life, and now that he's older, wiser, and sober, he knows that he's not just killing a man, but he's killing a mother's son, a brother, a friend, a lover, an entire person whose very existence he holds within his hands, and he can't do it. And what does Ned get for his temperance? Not much, seeing how Will finished the job and marked the three of them as targets for Little Bill, whether they were the ones who pulled the trigger or not. And because of that, we next find Ned sprawled against the cold steel bars of the Big Whiskey jailhouse as Little Bill mercilessly whips him for a crime he didn't commit. Meanwhile, we have Will and the Schofield kid posted outside the ranch where the remaining offender, Quick Mike, is hiding, ready to finish their job, and they do. the Schofield Kid dispatches Quick Mike as he relieves himself, succeeding in their mission as they ride away amidst a hail of gunfire. Afterwards, we find Will and the Schofield Kid atop a hill overlooking Big Whiskey discussing the events that just transpired, the wind rustling the dry grass around them, the sky laden with dark clouds, and the Schofield Kid sucking on a bottle of whiskey, the medicine required to dull the pain of taking the life of another man in cold blood, a notion that this young man once thought exciting and adventurous, but now realizes that what he's done is the most terrible thing one person can do to another, and now that he's experienced it for himself, he's vowed never to kill again. The misery doesn't end there though, as soon after, one of Skinny's girls comes to tell Will and the kid the bad news. Ned has been killed by Little Bill, accidentally, but killed all the same, whipped to death, as Little Bill was beating information out of him. And not only that, but his body is now on full display outside of Skinny's, as a grim warning to any would-be criminals who might find their way to Big Whiskey. And now it's William Money's turn to take a swig of whiskey, to down an entire bottle, and reinvigorate the murderous spirit he holds within him. A murderous spirit ready to enter the saloon of Big Whiskey and exact his revenge against the men who stand celebrating over the death of his friend. In the ensuing standoff, we find a hypocritical Little Bill berating William for killing the unarmed Skinny, a man who took it upon himself to beat unarmed men himself, not but a few days prior to this moment. And in the ensuing shootout, we find William Money keeping a cool head in the face of a bunch of scared, reckless shooters, and coming out ahead. An experienced and calm shooter who prevailed against uneven odds, just as Little Bill had described to Mr. Beauchamp. And in the end, William Money, the man who never answered for any of his crimes, rides off, never answering for them still. A man given a third chance at life, one who doesn't deserve it. And at the end of this tale, with all that we're given, what is the summation of all the evil in this story, and what have we learned? We've learned that the law can sometimes fall into the hands of men who consider themselves judge, jury, and executioner, men whose honorable intentions suffer with their lack of respect for the people they serve. We've learned that the world was, and is, an unjust place where men and women languish under the weight of the crimes inflicted upon them. We've learned that romantic tales of Western heroism are often made of myth and legend rather than fact. We've learned that the men and women who populate these stories are nothing more than people, some being the scant few who lead lives of nobility, and more still, the populous many who lead lives of mediocrity or villainy. We've learned that sometimes evil men are never brought forth to answer for their crimes, and instead prosper in the light of their vicious ways. But most importantly, we've learned that violence begets violence, that murder is a horrid business that leaves a scar upon a person's soul that all the whiskey in the world could never hope to heal. That no matter how enticing tales of adventure and adrenaline-filled violence are, on the other side of those tales lies the cold hard truth. Killing your fellow man is one of the most difficult and horrifying things a person can experience, even if they're your enemy. This story may be fictional, but the tale it tells is one based in fact and reality, a story that shows us the darker side of the eras we mystify and the people who live through them, showing us what folly well-intentioned people can sometimes fall prey to, and how that folly can engulf countless individuals in the suffocating miasma of evil. Thank you all for tuning in to this episode of Analyzing Evil, and I hope you've enjoyed. What are your thoughts on Unforgiven? Did I miss anything? Let me know down below, and leave a suggestion for a villain you'd like to see featured in a future episode while you're at it. If you like this video, hit that thumbs up button, and make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. A big thank you to all of my subscribers, and to my patrons, and a most vile thank you to those whose names you're seeing on screen now. Join the channel's Discord server and Reddit to interact with myself and the community, and follow me on the social media platforms listed below to keep up with the channel. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll be seeing you soon.